Well, hopefully by the end of this series, you will have had that conversation sooner. But welcome, those of you who are guests. My name is Greg Harris. I'm the senior pastor at Olive Branch on Home Outside. We're glad that you're with us. We're in a new series. We're calling it First In. You know, we're going to be talking about those conversations that honestly you don't always want to have with your kids. Anybody ever had to have one of those yet? Probably some of you. For some of you got younger kids or maybe got grandkids. This is an opportunity for all of us, uncles, aunts, anybody who is considered a trustworthy individual in the family to be willing to jump in on the spiritual side of these conversations as we kind of deal with 4 different ones. Now, this week we're gonna talk about doubts, but this kind of all pulls back for me into a picture. My wife, Teresa, she pretty much raised 4 kids. I raised a church. And no, but she's done a great job. And with our 4 kids, I can remember back, like, she would do some of the craziest things when you have 3 kids and she's pregnant and she's like, hey, we're going to go to the beach. And I'm thinking, I could never do 3 kids at a beach by myself. And yet there she is at the beach with her friends, and there's like 10, 12 kids running around at the beach. You know, that's not the safest place on the planet. And my daughter, Adeline, is our oldest. She'd been off at 6, like jumping in the water and playing in the waves because she was a fish and she loved it. In the meantime, my son Nate, who is the next oldest, would be like, I'm not touching the water. I'm scared to death of the waves. I don't want to do anything with the waves. So he'd be sitting there building sandcastles out of the sand. And then we would have Jonathan, who was an infant at that point. We just set him down anywhere from near Nate. And his one job was to sit there and just eat the sand all day long. Like pictures of sand in his face and mouth all the time. And eventually they would be playing and counting kids. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Always counting kids. 1, 2, 3, 4. How she would do that. And what was interesting though, is she'd get to this space where there would be a point where someone would be screaming bloody murder, like, "Wah!" Like there was some horrific thing that's happened. Your blood would run cold. And she would realize, oh, it's just Nate. The waves have now hit the sandcastle and it's starting to dissolve. Anybody had that situation happen? Yeah, kids don't like that, right? So Nate would be freaked out by that. And of course, I'm the dad. I'm like, why don't you just dig a big pit in front of it and stop worrying about it? And you're thinking, I'll fix the problem. But the problem was for me is that a picture now has shown up. Like, he didn't know to dig a pit. He's a kid. He didn't know to prepare for the waves to come in. He's just thinking, I'm building a sandcastle. This is awesome. And that can be the case for all of us when we start with kids. I got grandkids. At any stage of life, there is a situation, and when you think of that sandcastle, it's not a sandcastle. I want you to think of it as their faith. Or maybe it's their identity, or maybe it's their sexuality, or maybe it's even something like their mental health. And we as parents, we know our job is to help build these little sandcastles of these things, and yet there are waves of a culture coming in. And they're not hitting them directly. They're just sliding in and pulling out bits and pieces of that underside so that eventually it's crashing down to do it again and again and again. And in this series, with understanding that there are these waves coming in, aiming at that very sandcastle of your child's faith, in this case, we're talking about doubts. I want to challenge us to be prepared. I want to get us ready. And moms, you're kind of usually the last bastion of faith in many cases, in many homes. And so I want to encourage you to continue on in that journey. But all of us need to be people who, when it comes to our children, that we are the first ones in these conversations. And we need, especially when it comes to our children's doubts, we need to be the first ones in. So my daughter, Adeline, after she was a fish for so long, she, at 12 years old, was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And that's a pretty serious, stinky kind of diagnosis. And so there are many times she'll have gone through a flare-up and just be in massive amounts of pain and horrible things are going on. And we don't know what to do, and we're freaking out. But then she came to us one time with this simple question that she was just wrestling with. And she just said, why would God put me through this? And I'm like, I'm the pastor, and I can't answer that one. That's huge. This is the essence of these waves that come in life. Start hitting the foundations of whether it be faith or any of these other cases that we'll be talking about. And I want to challenge us that we don't have to be afraid of those, but we can be prepared for them. In fact, we can step into those first ones, and it's that our job as parents, our job as the grandparents, our job to be engaged if we have children in our lives that we've been entrusted to care for, that we need to be a part of this group that train up a child in the way it should go. And even when he's old, he will not depart from it. Now, I just want to focus on the first few words here. Oftentimes this is pointed out like, hey, train a kid in the right way, and they'll come out that way in the end. It's like, let's just set that all aside for now. It's a proverb. I just want to point out something I think a lot of our culture is forgetting, and that is the first two words, train up. This is talking to parents. You need to train up a child. The child doesn't get to tell us what they need, what they get to be, and what they do, right? Amen? We all get on that one? Because that seems to be a confusion. But also, your elementary school teacher isn't training up your child. The coach isn't training up your child. The youth pastor isn't training up your child. You train up your child. We supplement, we aid, we help, but this is the critical piece. And I'm talking to the parents then, who you're going to invite others in as we get into this. But it's our job to train up our children, and it's our job to be all set for the doubts and not be upset about the doubts. And that is easier said than done. When you have a child who comes up to you and starts asking you, why is Christianity the only one? If I was born in another country, wouldn't I be a Muslim? And you're going like, I don't know. When they approach you and they just go, I don't understand. Why is God against suicide if Jesus committed suicide? Doesn't it seem wrong? And you get these kind of questions that honestly should unmoor you, that can challenge you, that can make you think, oh my gosh, I've got a child who's deconverting. That's a big term out there right now. We have lots of people who have deconverted. And lots of these social media influencers who are backtracking on their faith because they didn't have some question answered by their church or some other group. And what I want to do is tell you guys that you don't have to be worried about this. When this comes your direction, you can be prepared. And there's a couple things I want you to do. First and foremost is not to freak out, because it doesn't mean that your child is abandoning the faith. I want to define the difference between what I call a scoffer, a questioner, and a doubter. All right, these are three different groups, and you have three different kinds of people. And so let's think about this. What is a scoffer? The Bible defines a scoffer for us. It says, whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse. And he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. Don't reprove a scoffer, or he'll hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he'll love you. So here's the thing. You got a scoffer on your hands when you try to give them information or answer their question, and they make fun of you for it. They're like, I was only bringing it up because I think you're stupid. They have an attitude about themselves. They're jaded. They don't care actually about the answer. They're just out to get your goat. They're just out to get you all messed up. That's a scoffer. And the Bible would say you don't really engage with scoffers. You pray for them. You love them. But to be quite honest, if they're not interested in the answer, then we're not really having a conversation. And I don't know, some of you may actually fit in that category yourself. I would just advise you to reconsider your scoffing. Why is it that you feel that way? Is it because somebody didn't answer a question in the past? Now you think you can't answer questions. Well, I'm here to tell you that our goal is to ask questions. Here at Olive Branch, one of the things I want to do is ensure that we as a people ask questions. Questions are critical. But what I've noticed is the longer I've been a pastor, the more I've asked this question. You got any questions? And people are like, nope. I'm like, I am not that smart or that good to have covered everything. What I think has gone on is we've forgotten how to be curious like children. Children always have questions, don't they? My daughter was a little baby. I'd be holding her, and she was learning language, and she would literally sit there and go, what's that? And I'd tell her what that was. What's that? And she just pointed at all these things. What's that? What's that? One day it got so annoying. I was standing in front of the refrigerator, and I'm all, that's a refrigerator. That's a door. That's a handle. That's a magnet. That's a this. That. And I'm just pointing at everything, saying what it is, and she finds the one thing I didn't point at. She says, what's that? And I'm like, I failed. It's like that kid who goes, why? Why? Like, we're great at asking questions when we're little. Somewhere along the line, I think the church, especially in the church, we stopped getting curious because you got scared. Then when a question's asked, maybe I'm going to freeze up and I don't know how to answer the question. Somebody told you once, I just have faith. And you're like, okay, there's no answer to that one. Apparently, we're not supposed to ask questions around here. That's a freaky thing. And so I think we don't. I think we get to a space where we're just kind of like, yeah, I'm not supposed to doubt. I'm not supposed to be afraid. That's scary. I'm just going to be an ostrich and put my head in the sand. And we've kind of conditioned ourselves in this way. And I'm here to remind us that, you know what? Questioning is how you grow in understanding. We need to ask questions. You're going to ask questions. Don't be afraid of your questions. Engage your questions. Doubting Thomas had questions, and Jesus answered the questions. He didn't go, how dare you ask a question? Get out of here. Just have faith. No, that wasn't the engagement with Jesus at all. Jesus wants to challenge us to have questions, but the questions may be different than doubt. Some of us have questions. I have lots of questions, but I don't have a lot of doubts anymore. I did when I was younger. Because doubts are different than just questions. So you have your scoffers who don't care. You got your questioners. We're going to all ask questions. But what is a doubter? What do we really mean when we doubt? And this is where I come to a passage in the book of Matthew. In Matthew chapter 14, if you guys want to go there, it's basically 22 all the way through to 33. I'll pick up on the screen on verse 28. But if you want to go there with me, Jesus has just finished taking all of these people and feeding 5,000 with the loaves and the fishes. You guys know that miracle. Now, immediately he tells the disciples, get in the boat and go. And I don't know what they were thinking is like, where's Jesus going to catch up with us on the shore? Are we like going on an excursion by ourselves for a while? Who knows? But they get out on the water and they start going away. In the meantime, he's dismissing the crowds and he goes up on a mountain to pray. It's still quite a while. Well, the wind kicks up. There's all these waves hitting and the wind's hitting them. They're freaking out because Jesus steps out onto the water and starts walking towards them. This is the famous walking on the water scene. As Jesus is coming towards them, the disciples, they're faithful men. They're like, oh, it's Jesus, he's God. No, they're freaking out. They think it's a ghost. That's a natural human reaction. If you were in the middle of the water and you saw some humanoid figure walking toward you, you'd be like, that's not right. That is totally, what in the world? Well, as they're coming, Jesus says, don't fear, take heart, it is I. And so Peter responds and answers, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. And he said, come. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Right there is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Let me see the weirdness in this. I don't know about you. You're sitting in a boat. It's Jesus coming at you. And you go, oh, it's Jesus. Jesus, let me come out to you. And so he's like, yeah, come. And you're like, okay. And suddenly, you're standing on water and you're walking towards Jesus on water. I mean, you got to be like, dude, I'm following the guy who's over heaven and earth. This is incredible. Dude, we're going to take over the world. You'd be so pumped up. No. Peter looks at the wind and the waves and goes, I'm going to die while walking on water. Do you get the disconnect here? What's even weirder is Jesus' response, and the author wants you to focus on the response and the way he wrote it in the Greek. He goes, Jesus immediately reached out his hand, he took hold of him, and saying to him, he wants you to fixate onto the statement. He says, oh, you of little faith, or you of little trust, why did you doubt? I have a question. Do you see doubt in the text anywhere here? You see fear. Why didn't he say, oh, you of little courage, why did you fear? Why did he say that? Why didn't he say that? He just told him, don't fear. No, he chooses the word doubt. Because there's something going on in the text in which you and I need to see this, that when you have a doubt, it's because you're giving an opportunity to grow in your trust of God's power and ability in his promises. When you doubt, it's a test between, do you trust God and what he's promised, or do you trust that this thing is more powerful than God? And there will be a contest in your heart as you grow in your faith about things that you may think is more powerful than God, or maybe more true than the scriptures, or you name it, and you're gonna waffle in this zone of like, oh crud, I don't know if I'm gonna keep my faith because I'm struggling to trust that Jesus, who's making me walk on water, can overcome this objection of this wind, that Jesus, who's promised that I'm going to go to heaven, can overcome these scenarios where these nice people are dying without him. That Jesus, who is this God of love, could possibly send anybody to hell. Like, these are the tension markers that will cause you to question, am I really holding on? Now, when these things come, I want you to notice that Jesus didn't just leave Peter in the water. He went up, pulled him up, and walked with him. And then talk to him about it. And Peter ends up what? He doesn't walk away from the faith. He ends up being Peter, we all know as the Apostle Peter. And so we see that this is not bad to have doubts. It's a natural part of the process of developing trust. And guess what? You're doing that in any relationship that you have. You're going to go through times of distrust and growth and trust, and it's going to develop. And that's what doubts are about. Sometimes they come in the form of questions. Sometimes they come in different forms. And what I want to do is tell you as parents, as loved ones, that you need to engage and get involved in those doubts. And so be set for doubts by being first in. And the way you do that is first in your own doubts. Can we just be honest? You all have them. Everybody in this room probably has some doubts of some kind at some point. And I want you to stop hiding from your doubts. Here at Olive Branch, the thing we want you to be able to do is to ask questions, to share your doubts, to be able to struggle. Churches too often are afraid of this. I'm not. I've struggled through doubt upon doubt, through question after question, and what I've found over and over and over is there's an answer, and Jesus is faithful. I'm not afraid of the questions or the doubts. And I don't think anybody should be, but I do think that you need to be honest because everybody here has doubts. We all struggle with doubts at times. And if we're not willing to admit those doubts, you're not going to be able to help your children walk through theirs. They're going to know, oh, when I have a doubt, we don't talk about those things. You'll say things like, I just have faith. I don't know, it doesn't really matter. I'm not that kind of a person. Yeah, go ask your uncle. Go talk to the pastor. You're going to push it off as if that's not your category as the parent. And I'm going to tell you guys, this is totally where we belong. We need to be involved in the formation of our children's faith by engaging those doubts and those struggles, engaging those fearful points, and knowing that Jesus is with you to walk through them and you're not alone. And so you need to engage by growing in your own Christian worldview. And this is how I put this. Christian worldview is the idea of how you think, live, and act in your faith. And we'd say it this way, to love Christ, to live for Christ, and to share Christ. And by the way, that is not a checklist. I think a lot of people think that discipleship is like, check, I love Jesus, check, I live for Jesus, check, I've shared Jesus once. Okay, I'm done. Now what? Give me some more classes. No, our goal is to remind you that there's a lot of things you can forget. The first time you ever went through the time to know Jesus, there's a lot of things you got wrong that you need to have corrected. This is a journey, I call it a spiral of growth. And you're going to revisit those things. And if you're not developing those things because you had a doubt somewhere, you're not going to go back to your Bible and go like, I'm going to ask good questions. You're going to be like, I don't know how to even think through this stuff. I don't want to talk about it. I'm not going to touch it. And so now you're not really going to engage further in loving for Christ. So you're out there to live for Christ as best as you can, and you're trying to do stuff and show everybody you're a Christian, and suddenly it comes to sharing Christ, and you go, you might ask me a question. I don't know how to answer that. I don't even want to ask myself, so I'm just going to kind of stay right here and doing stuff. And you're going to burn out. You're going to think that Jesus didn't do it. It's a great way to turn your faith into a bunch of doing stuff. What I want to tell you is, yeah, you should get out there and ask that question. When that question comes at you and it overwhelms you because you're trying to share Christ, you go back to loving Christ and you engage with him again. And you find that there's answers. You find that he's faithful. You find that he's empowered you. You find that there's a deeper prayer. There's a deeper word. And suddenly you're like ready to engage with your giftedness. And now you're really doing, now you got an answer and you're just going to keep growing. And when you do that, now you're modeling for your children. Now you're modeling for your family how you handle a doubt and how you handle growth. But we can't run from them. It's not just fighting them off and answering them all the time. No, we have a whole bunch of tools to help you guys do this. You can use those little QR codes. You can look that up there, or you can just go out and check out our tool wall that we put up for you guys for this series. Lots of books, lots of cool stuff like Mama Bear Apologetics. That's an easy one to remember. Just think of Mama Bear, and that's apologetics. They've got a podcast. They've got some great books, and this is an excellent place to begin, where they're dealing with it from a parent's perspective on how to train our children in this section of things like doubts and questions and struggles. So I want to encourage you guys that there's tons of help, including the church. We would love to continue to give you aid. Now, to be first in, you got to have handled your own doubts. But to be first in, secondly, you got to have a safe space for your kids. And I don't mean this like, hey, safe space, politically speaking. So throw that out of your head. I know that can be a trigger word. Jesus understood the concept of a safe location. And why do I say that? Because you don't see it, but it's here in this text where he's about to ask them, who do you say that I am? They're going to say, oh, you're this, you're that. No, we believe that you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. This is where that profession comes out. What happens is that before he does that, he takes them to this place called Caesarea Philippi. Now, maybe you don't know where Caesarea Philippi is because we don't know our biblical geography and we're not geeks and nerds like me, but let me just let you know where it is. You got Israel, and just north is this giant pagan Gentile town area called Caesarea Philippi. I mean, they were pagan, very pagan, worshiping foreign gods, doing weird stuff. Jewish people wouldn't go there. You know who had an opinion about the Messiah? The Jewish people. The Pharisees and the Sadducees loved to talk about Messiah, and so oftentimes you'd see Jesus going like, ignoring that he's being called the Messiah, like kind of setting it aside, but not when he gets here. He has to go to a safe location where nobody gives a rip who the Messiah is for the Jews, so he can ask them, who do you say that I am? It's in that safe location the disciples are able to open up. He's able to tell them things that he's never told them before. He opens an entire door. Guys, we need to produce similar locations for our kids where they can feel safe to expose their hearts and their struggles. I believe the best place for that is like a dinner table, to be quite honest. Dinner tables at dinner time are one of the greatest places to have some of the craziest, most irritating conversations you can have in your life. Like there, your kids can open up their hearts and say, I don't get it. Why do we think the Bible doesn't lie to us? I feel like when my friend here says there's contradictions all over the place. Wow, what a fun conversation. You know, at our house, it's consistently talked about everything that we can possibly think of. My wife will read a book and she'll bring out a question. My kids will think, hey, here's something, they'll bring it up. And a lot of times, once a week, we're talking about sex at some point because that's what a lot of people are talking about. So much so, my kids will tell you, my parents talk about sex way too much. And you're thinking, the pastor? Yeah, because we want in our house for that to be such a safe conversation. They don't even think twice about it. That they know, mom and dad talk about it all the time. I'll just tell them what's going on. There's no thing off the table because we're family and we're going to work it through. We're going to talk about it. We're going to challenge each other. If you want a real safe place, like in a car ride or something like that, allow your children to share their heart. Even allow them to call you a hypocrite when you're a hypocrite. If they can point out your hypocrisy and feel safe about doing it, you've created a truly safe place that they can begin a dialogue about their deepest, darkest fears. And it depends on how you are able to handle that when they bring that to your attention. But our goal is to bring a place in which our children can bring these doubts and these struggles truly to the forefront so we can be the first ones in. Because I don't know if we want everybody else to be the first ones in. There are people out there who would love, just kick their sandcastle over. Others who mean well, but they don't realize they're knocking parts down. And so if you're growing in your faith and you understand these things, then you should be engaged. But does that mean you do it all by yourself? No, you do involve people. In fact, at Olive Branch, one of the encouraging things our family ministry tries to do is tell you guys, for each of your kids, there needs to be at least 5 people around them that are mature Christians outside of you as parents. They could be aunts and uncles and grandparents, but it needs to be like, maybe it's a youth leader, maybe it's somebody else, but they're able to go to that person, feel free enough to talk about them. And sometimes a kid will open up to their youth leader before they'll open up to you. And if that youth leader's smart, they'll connect with you, and the 3 of you together will begin to deal with that very deep doubt. And the doubt is something I want you and I to be able to be first in on as parents, grandparents, you name it, however your community is put together, so that you can engage it and be ready. And you need these 5 because they're going to be the ones also listening and hearing. They might find out, there's these influencers out there and maybe online influencers or just friends that they're talking to, and heads up, this is what they're talking, this is what they're saying. I just need you to know so you can be prepared. We need to be prepared with these things, because we need to be the first ones in. But that doesn't mean you just jump in and jump out. That's not like what I'm saying. I'm like, I'm first in. Yeah, okay, goodbye. No, I want you to stick with it. Go in and stay in. Be first in and stay there. Because this is critical. We need to stick with because again, these questions can be frightening. They can be overwhelmingly scary. When you start hearing things like, hey, my friend is like, he says that everybody's a little bit gay. What do you do? I never heard that before. I don't want to say anything bad. And I'm bringing him over for dinner. We're all going to have, whatever. Guys, what can happen oftentimes is the doubts of your children, the struggles of your kids can become your own. And so it's scary. And you want to just be kind of like, yeah, I don't know, good talk. And just, walk away. Don't do that. That's hard. Stay in it. Engage. Jesus didn't just walk past Peter and said, have fun, trust in the wind. Okay, I'm getting back on the boat. And he walked over, picked him up, and helped him out. God is with you in the midst of the doubts that you have. He's going to be with your children. You have to come alongside and trust that God's with you as you journey together back towards that boat and through these doubts into faith. And that's going to look very different in a lot of different cases. But I believe one thing is absolutely essential if you're going to stick with your kids, and that is you bring them to church. I know this sounds so self-aggrandizing, and I'm very aware. I'm a pastor telling you to bring your kids to church, but let me explain something. I believe you need to bring your kids to church because what we do when we bring them once a month, once every few months or whatever, is we introduce them to a concept about church that's more about consuming things at church. Yeah, I can buy church here and we can go do that and buy church. And church is when we want to do it. And I understand that feeling. But you lose out on a deep sense of community that comes when you're here every week. You know what? You know one of the things that I love to hear, and it was a little shocking because we weren't prepared for this. My daughter told my wife this just a few weeks ago. She's like, you know what, Mom and Dad, you guys are great, but you're not the reason I really was following Jesus. It was Miss Stephanie that infected me the most. And if you don't know who Stephanie Baumgartner was, she was our old children's director and was my daughter's children's director all the way up. And there was something about the way Stephanie presented things and lived it out and engaged my daughter that just infected her with Jesus. I could answer all the questions I want. My wife and I could do everything. And we're like, we said all those things, but it was Miss Stephanie that got to her heart. But that wouldn't have happened if she hadn't been there in day out to know who Miss Stephanie was and believe her. Some of the times you meet kids will come in, they don't know who this leader is, and suddenly it's a different leader. And now they got it, and they're just like, what? It can be so inconsistent, and we can be so inconsistent that we can give the wrong assumptions, and then you miss out on information. Look, I'm sorry, I don't always preach things that are super like, oh, that's so cool. Sometimes it's relevant. Sometimes it seems like, what are you talking about? Why are we in Exodus? And the reason why is my job is not to make myself feel good and like what I'm talking about. That's what the podcast is for. No, I'm just kidding. And my job is to equip you, to give you information to help you think as Christians, to help you apply this to your life and engage with other people. And so the struggle I have sometimes is I'll preach things that I'm not even sure if it's even helpful. And yet I had a lady named Christina. She came up to me and she was like, oh man, I'm so glad I've been coming to church more often. I would have totally missed that sermon. I'm like, what sermon? I'm thinking like one of our really practical sermons or apologies. She's like, the one from Exodus. I'm like, that's a first. Okay, well, tell me more. And she goes, oh, it was about slavery. You see, my son, you were talking about slavery and all this stuff and from the Bible and the Bible's perspective on slavery. And my son was in this class and he was told that, the American slavery is identical to the ancient Bible slavery and the Bible endorses that slavery. But if it hadn't been for your sermon that I heard, that we learned that wasn't the case, I was able to walk him through and guide him. He could talk to his teacher. Imagine she missed that week. And there's a lot of cases like this. I just want to encourage you that it's that consistency that enables us to be ready because we're trying to give you things that are going to help you in your journey with your own children and your own life. And now this doesn't mean that when you come to church, you just go, we're at church. Where's the youth pastor? Take my kid, make him a Christian. Okay, I'm going to get out of here. No, that's like I'll ditch into the community. Don't do that. I mean, I love Nick, but he's not a professional. And I'm kidding because he always makes fun of me. But I'm not a professional either when it comes to your child. Don't expect us to be the professionals over your children. You know your children. Sure, we can ask questions, we can answer questions, we can give you advice. This can be very abstract. You have to be the one who knows your kid. And so if you come with a question, sit down and have the question answered together. Engage, stay in the zone. Stay with us, and you will find out that you're going to learn, and they're going to learn together, and they're going to see that you care. Because you're not just in to ditch them to some answer person. You're able to engage with them longer and in a deeper relationship. And there you can have all kinds of great trusted sources you can do that with. I'll just point you not only to that wall out there, but Right Now Media is something that if you haven't signed up for it, go to our website, go onto our small group page, and if you're part of our church, it's there for you for free to sign up for. And it's basically a Christian Netflix of like study materials. And if you have a question, they've got answers from elementary school all the way up to adults in everything from church history down to you name it, Bible studies and apologetics and all this stuff that you were thinking like, I don't know where to get answers for that. It's right there. And I want to encourage you to have resources and places to go and people to connect with, like our children's director, like Gina, like me, like Nick, all these people who are able to engage with you. And the reason we want you to stay close, though, is because here's the real secret about doubts. You need to stay close because you need to be able to handle the hurts. Most real doubts are not intellectual questions. Most real doubts are a painful experience somewhere in the past. At some point when a child has felt completely rejected and insignificant, or completely unable to figure something out for themselves, and they feel stupid. Or they just feel completely like they're incapable of doing anything. I just don't even, I can't even get out of the mess. But here's the thing, they won't tell you sometimes what's going on underneath because they're afraid it's going to hurt you as the parent. And so it comes up as a question, it comes up as a doubt, it comes up as an objection. And if you'll sit long enough, you'll begin to realize there's actually a pain and a fear that's driving these objections and these other things. And here's the thing, when you engage with somebody who's in a real doubt in a situation like that, I want to tell you, men, hear me out. And some women, and vice versa, this applies to everybody, but men mainly. The problem is when you hear a problem, we want to do what? We want to solve the problem. And your child brings you an objection, you're like, I'm solve the problem, give me the books and the resources, da, 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 da. Awesome. Don't do that. Ladies, you're not necessarily always want to solve the problem, but I guarantee you some of you are into soothing the emotions. You're like, this is just emotional. Just soothe it. It's okay. You're going to be fine. You want to soothe the emotions, but not solve the problem. And neither of these things are helpful. You can't soothe the emotions or solve the problem. What you have to do is listen. We don't want to stop them from feeling things and make them understand stuff. Sometimes you just need to stop and listen. I love this proverb. If anyone gives an answer before he hears it, it is his folly and shame. If anyone gives an answer before he hears, have we stopped to hear? Sometimes we want to jump to solutions. Sometimes we want to jump to the end, but we haven't heard. There may be objections, but really what's underneath all of those objections is a pain. We need to sit and last long enough with our family, our loved ones, our children, to get to that pain. That may be driving all the questions. But what's really going on is how they were treated at youth, or how they were treated by you at a certain point. And they're not sure what to do with it. And so we need to stay in close, and we need to stay near them without trying to answer everything. And we don't want to shame them for their struggles. We want to engage, apologize where we need to, continue to love them forward, and then the real questions will surface. Now, this stuff is not rocket science, but it's not easy either. And in some of the cases, for most of you probably in the room, you're going like, Greg, this is awesome, but I wish that you told me this like 20 years ago. You know, that would have been helpful because your kids are up and older and gone. What do you do if you're not first in? What do you do if you have teenagers and you haven't engaged these things first, but somebody else has? And so if you're not first in, I want to encourage you to go back to Jesus and just read him. How did he handle people? Because he wasn't the first in any case. He didn't get to be first in with any of his disciples. They already had all this Jewish background and these Pharisees and Sadducees and the rabbis and all this stuff. And so when he engaged with them, he had to reset things. In fact, he would get constant objections from people who were of a different thinking than he was. I'll give you one of the examples. Right here in Matthew chapter 9, Jesus meets the disciples of John. And so this is John the Baptist. John the Baptist has just said, see Jesus? I can't even tie his sandals. Follow that dude. So he's raised his disciples. He's like, go with him. And these guys are like, we can't go with him. Look, they don't fast the same. The disciples of John came to him and said, why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples don't fast? Like, we're supposed to follow you, but you don't even fast right, like we've been taught. That's how Jesus handles this. They've been influenced already in one way. And he says to them, can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? He totally reframes the subject with a question to get them thinking. And he goes, the days will come when the bridegroom's taken away from them, and then they'll fast. He says, listen, this isn't about rules. This is about a relationship. When they're in a relationship with me, why would they fast? When I'm gone, yeah, there'll be time to fast. The relationship's adjusted. This isn't about rules. And notice how Jesus takes and handles the real problem and adjusts it and finesses it. We can learn to do the same thing. You see, when you meet your child and they've got an objection and because they've already got an answer and they got it from somewhere else, here's how you begin to engage when you're not first in. I advise you to memorize this language. Other than saying, hey, I've got this objection, and you're like, I don't know, let's go find out together. That's one answer that you all can do. You don't have to have all the answers. Just go, I don't know, let's go find out together. Now, if they go, well, I do know, here's your next question. Interesting. Where'd you get that from? And most of the times I'll tell you, I thought of it myself. You're like, yeah, right. All right, let me ask you a question. And you don't say it that way. You go like, okay, so you thought of it yourself. Well, help me out here. Like, walk me through how you got there. I love that word. I love that language. Walk me through how you got there. That is usually when I find out they didn't walk themselves to that spot. Somebody told them that. And you go, oh, interesting. Now you realize there's another authority. Guys, don't be surprised. Everybody has an authority they believe does not lie to them. You realize that? Everybody thinks something's inerrant. I believe the Bible does not lie to me. I believe that it is inerrant. And it's the source of the information I take into life. And I think people think I'm weird for that. I think people are strange that they think the History Channel doesn't lie to them. Or that their professors in their colleges don't pass false information to them. Or that their parents didn't pass some false information to them. Look, bottom line is we all have authorities we believe don't lie to us. And when your child is willing to say something so strongly that they've come to this conclusion, okay, great. Who is the authority they're believing and why do they believe them? And that's where you're getting to. And you do that gently. You do that carefully until you understand who the authority is, and then you learn about the authority and you ask penetrating questions. And you let them wiggle on the questions. Don't let them off. Two of them were like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm hurting your feelings. If they get mad at you, then that question's not a real question. Let me put it this way. If they get mad at you, there is something that's happened that's under the objection. So you go under the question, because now they're mad. People don't get mad at questions. People get mad at the reaction the question is bringing up in their soul. There's something deeper going on that you want to engage that is making the answer attractive. And so you don't leave, you don't give up, you just simply care because somewhere in there is something painful, somewhere in there is something difficult. And you ask these careful questions, you ask to think through them, and you do what Jesus did, which was about a relationship. And you bring it back to the relationship, which is what I love about what Josh McDowell told his son, Sean. Josh McDowell, everybody know Josh McDowell? Josh McDowell wrote a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. It was really popular in the 80s and the 90s as kind of like the book for apologetics, which is the way of defending the Christian faith. And fascinating that when, Sean, his oldest son, went to college, came to his dad, and he's like, I just really am struggling. I don't know if I'm going to be able to believe this Christianity thing because I'm learning so many things. He's like, and I love what Josh did. He went back into his back room and he grabbed every book he ever wrote, came out and said, read them all. No, he didn't do that. He actually went to him and said, that's great, son. You need to evaluate and think through all the questions and explore them. And I'll go with you, but you need to be convinced of it yourself. And if one day you choose to believe the opposite of me, know that I will always love you. I will disagree with you. I will continue to challenge you, but I will always love you. That's where we're at. If somebody's come in first and moved your child in a different direction. You pray, you care, you always love. We make it available as a place to always have great conversations. And that's what I think church should be too. We're a family. We need to be a people ready to engage with these questions. And so maybe you are jumped out of the sermon way back when I said, you have doubts and you have questions. And you're like, and you're just scanning them through your head because you never let yourself feel those. And ever since, you've just been like, I don't know what to do. Well, here, we'll give you an option. A starting point is not about just coming to faith or before your faith. It's also an opportunity for those of you who are growing in your faith and have questions and doubts that you never thought you could have answered because somebody just said, just believe it. No, there's a place to go in and engage. Ask your questions. Take on different subjects from, hey, how does science and creation work? And what about this? And how do I deal with the issues of the law? He seems so judgmental. All these great questions. And it enables you to begin to engage deeper. Maybe you don't have intellectual questions. I would advise you to continue to consider talking to a pastor, engaging with people to really deal through maybe the emotional, spiritual abuse or things that are in your past that's causing you to have a harder time trusting the Lord. But these things are available here at Olive Branch, and we want to encourage you to be a part of them. And so maybe it's jumping into starting point. You can use this next steps card, it's the green one in your seats, so you can let us know. And jump into that because you want to deal with your objections before you can deal with your families. We'd love for you to do that. But overall, I want to just encourage you. I believe the Lord is with you as parents. He will guide you to the resources and the people that you need to be first in all of these issues we're going to cover. And maybe next week's the scary one as we talk about identity. You want to come back for that? I would love to walk with you in that. please come back. Maybe you know somebody else who's needing some of that conversation. Bring them with you. But otherwise, let me just pray over you and ask God's blessing on you as you engage and become those who are getting first in your kids' lives. Lord, first, I just want to honor those who are already first in and ask that you would bless them as they continue on that journey, not to give up or jump out, but God, that you would continue to give them encouragement and that they would walk alongside maybe those who are about to jump in. Lord, I know that there are many parents in this room who have young kiddos and are going to be the first ones to jump in. Would you give them energy? Would you give them resolve? Would you help their parents and the grandparents to be available as part of the teams that pour in, the uncles and the aunts? God, would you allow the ministry leaders and the partners in our church to come around each other, to encourage each other? God, in this way that we'd be a people who are growing in our faith, not allowing our doubts to be shielded and hid, but allowing us to grow through them to a greater and greater faith in you. And so we ask now that you would indeed aid us and lead us back into that boat as we walk through these doubts. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.